Hey developers, today we're gonna create an app to help Team Seas. If you don't know, Team Seas is trying to help clean up the oceans with Mr. Beast and Mark Rober. So I have created an application that takes the latest and greatest videos using the YouTube API and displays it to you in this card system. So we're gonna use a whole bunch of different technologies to do this. On the front end, we're gonna use Vue 3. We're gonna use Appsync, which is a managed GraphQL instance. We're gonna use Cognito user pools, which will handle our authentication and authorization. We're gonna create groups in it. We're also creating a Lambda function, which is gonna have access to these different services. We're gonna use cron jobs. We're gonna mock it all up. So I'm gonna show you all these different APIs and we're gonna walk through it step by step. Hey, and if you can, make sure you click over here and donate to Team Seas. They're a great cause. But let's just go ahead and jump into it. All right, so let's see if we can create this website. You can see here are listed from the YouTube API, the Team Seas list of videos, and I created a card for each. The top of the card has the title, then you have the name of the channel, the release date, the description, and then you also have a channel info. So if you click here, this will actually open to the YouTube page where you can play the video, or you can click here and this will open up the channel information page. That's pretty much it. This is just a flex box and flex display. It's wrapping down so it's responsive. Pretty simple there. I'll show you the code in 1 second and we'll kind of walk through it one by one. So what I did is I created a new app and I'll walk you through the steps, but I went ahead and off camera added a few things just to speed up this video a little bit. First, I'm using Vite. But you can certainly do this with React or Angular. If you guys really want me to do this in React, leave a comment below and I can probably go ahead and do that. I have Node installed. I used npm init vite at latest. And then I made a couple of changes. I created in the app view file, this one right here, I have this card that I created. It's called the card. And that's this card right here. So each one of these is a component. And then I have some values I'm passing to it. I'm also using the new script setup syntax inside Vue, and it has lang equals ts, so I'm using TypeScript. I'm also using the latest, greatest version of Tailwind. So I'm not gonna go through how do you install that, but I'll show you real quickly. If you go to the Tailwind guides to install for Vue 3 or Vite, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just need to, it's straightforward. I don't know if it's super simple, but you just need to install it, install the dependencies. You have to create this config file, and then you create the CSS file, and then you just import it into your main file, and that's it. And then after that, it'll work. I also installed a couple of other packages just to start us off with. The AWS Amplify package, because we're gonna use Amplify in our backend. We're using a Lambda function to act as almost a utility or a script to automatically connect to our Google API to grab the videos we want. We're also using this AWS Amplify ui-vue. This is a project that I personally worked on. Not completely ready yet, but I just wanted to show a quick preview of it. This allows us to really quickly create an authenticator so we can use Amazon Cognito and log in and create accounts. And so here is the card that I did. And I have these URLs here, and these URLs here are what's going to kind of compose the card. And really, if you look at it and you start it up, this is what it looks like right now. This is all we have. Like no, it's not grabbing any data from our Appsync backend. It's just kind of this ugly card. And you can see here, I'm just passing in nothing to these. And if you're not familiar with Vue 3, this is the kind of the new script setup syntax. You can use this thing called define props. And also using TypeScript, by the way. And define props allows you to define which props you want. You can also, there's one you can do with defaults, but since I didn't want to add any defaults, I just used the define props. And then I'm using this toRefs, and just to realize, anytime you're using define props, you don't want to destructure the props right here on this line. You want to destructure it with toRefs, otherwise they will lose its reactivity. And then this is just a real simple date function to grab the month, date, and year. And then I have a function too, so you can pass in a URL and it'll open up in a new window. The code itself, I'm not gonna get too much into this. It's just mostly Tailwind. And in fact, I kind of borrowed some from this Tailwind's components website, which I'll leave a link in the description to give credit where credit's due. Kind of took some inspiration there. I changed some things around. And you can see here I have a click handler so the whole card is on click. And then just some Tailwind CSS to do like the transition with the easing in and out and the transform of it. So that's how we want to begin. Let's go ahead and set up Amplify to show you how that would work. So first I want to say, if you don't know already, that AWS has a free tier. So this Amazon Web Services has many different services, and you can get them for free, like hundreds of products for free in the free tier for 12 months, and you get lots of time to do many things. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't created an account, create a free account, try out the free tier for a year, essentially, and try it out and see if it works for you. Also, what I'm using the API Google services, so I'm using a YouTube API. I'm not going to show you exactly how to set that up, but basically what you do is you sign up for Google, so use your Gmail account or whatever you need, then click on the credentials button, and there should be like an add credentials button, and then you can get your YouTube API key, and it's free for up to a certain amount of requests a day. I believe it's 10,000 requests, and depending on what you're doing, it's like could be like 100 or 1 request. So keep that in mind, that it's free for up to a point. And then also make sure you support Team C's. Obviously, I'll put a link in the description for this as well. Let's see if we can get Amplify set up. So first thing you need to do, if you haven't already, is you need to install the Amplify CLI. So if you Google it, you can just go to this docs.amplify.com CLI, and you can install it through install Amplify CLI. So you can do npm install tacg at AWS CLI. And this tool will make it easier to follow this whole tutorial. Otherwise, when you run AWS Amplify, it won't work. After you do that, you just do, and I'm in the folder, by the way, my folder, the root folder of the Vite app I just created. What I can do to start is I'll do Amplify Init. And what this will do is it'll essentially create and by the way, if you have an older version of Amplify, it's really a good idea to install the latest. So I always do that before I start anything. So I'm going to do that right now because I just noticed it says I have an older version. So this will just take a moment. Okay, so we have the actual Amplify CLI installed. So I should be able to init it. So I'll type in Amplify Init, and this will start that process. It should ask me a few questions. Okay, so I'm going to call it Team C's Vue AWS, and it auto-detected everything for me. So I'm just going to say yes here, and it should automatically create everything for me. And it's asking me how I want to connect. I'll just do AWS profile. By the way, if this is the first time you're running this, you might have some more questions. It might actually ask you to configure it first, which will require you to log into your AWS account. Since I've already logged in, this works. All right, so went ahead and implemented, or the Amplify initialized the app. So real quickly, I want to use the authenticator. So remember I said I installed in the package.json this Amplify ui-vue. I did have to make a couple of modifications as well to get this working, which I'll show you in a sec. One is I went into the main index.html file and I added this window global window var exports. And if you're curious to how I did this, it's all in our getting started guide, which I'll include. Like I said, this hasn't been released yet, but we are looking for people to test it out, and it's for Vue, Angular, and React. And right now you have to add a couple things in to get it working for Vite. You have to add in this into the script tag and also inside the Vite config. So if I go to the Vite config, I also had to add this runtime config browser, and I also made one more change in this tsconfig file. I added in skip live check equals true, and this just helps when you build it so it doesn't try to check your libraries, the AWS Amplify library. Since I get that out of the way, let's go back, take a look at our console here. Now, since we have this initialized, and by the way, you can tell that's initialized, there's going to be a new folder called Amplify listed. And this means that you have the Amplify app initialized into your app here, the Amplify service. And now you can get access to all the AWS services the Amplify supports. Now I can add stuff. So first one I'm gonna do is Amplify add auth. And this is gonna add in authentication so I can talk to a Cognito backend. And that'll do my authentication and authorization. So I'm gonna do default configuration. I'm gonna choose email. And then for right now, I'm gonna say, no, I'm done. And this will go ahead and create the CloudFormation scripts and everything I need to do to be able to talk to a backend. And it's asking me if I want to push it or publish it, but I want to add a few other things. I'm going to add an API, and this is going to be my GraphQL API that I have in the background. So it's going to ask me if I want GraphQL REST. I'm going to choose GraphQL. Yeah, I guess I'll call it Team C's. Now it's asking what the default authorization. Since we have Cognito, I'm going to use the Amazon Cognito user pool. And for now, I'm going to be done. And do you have an annotated GraphQL schema? No. It's going to ask me if I want a single or one-to-many relationship. I'm going to just do a single. And it's going to create some mutations and some scripts so I can more easily interact with the API. Cool. Do you want to edit the schema now? Sure, I can take a look at it. And I'm in VS Code. It actually opened into a new window, so I don't really need that. But if I go back over here and I just look for the schema, GraphQL, here it is. So it created this. It's basically just a to-do model, pretty ugly. This is not exactly what we want. Let's edit this. And so what I'm going to do, instead of calling it to-do, I'm going to call it video. And it's going to have an app model, but you can actually add authentication to this. So what I want is on this website here, I want it to, so you don't have to be logged in to see it, but if you are logged in, you can make changes to it. And I don't have a login here, but we could have, and I'll show you how that works. So you can add in these little annotations, so this at here, so I can put at auth. And if you're totally confused about this, you can actually look up, if you just Google for Amplify, it's called, I'm using the Appsync service, which is a managed GraphQL service, and look at auth. Then there's a lot of different docs about configuration authorization models and things like that and how to use them. And inside this at auth here, I can add some rules. And inside this rules, I can allow or disallow things. So what's really easy is I can allow, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow groups, but only if the groups have admin, this admin role, which I'll add in a second. And I also want to allow the public, and that means anyone, but they only can read. Cool. So these two rules will allow us to, if you're a authorized user and you're in the admin group, then you can create, update, delete, or read. But if you just want to read, you can actually be public as well. That gives it kind of the best of both worlds. And now I can add in a couple of different properties. So I'm going to copy and paste this from another screen. But essentially, here is what I have. I have a video ID, thumbnail default, a date time. So these, by the way, this little squiggly line is because I'm using it's C-spell, so I'll just add video ID and this thumbnail to my AdWords to workspace settings. Let's see here. Quick fix, add thumbnail. I misspelled this, but it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna leave it here and I'm just gonna add it. Cool. So here is my new auth with all my different auth rules. And we probably want to add in a few other things. Let's see if we can just push this up for right now. So to do that, I can do Amplify status, and this is going to tell me the changes I've made and that I can push them up to the cloud. They're both create. So I'm going to go ahead and push this and see if we can get this working. Oops, and it says I have an error because I didn't pay attention. So I'm going to try it again. Oh, this is another thing. It says auth directive with an API key provider found, but the project has no API key authentication provider configured. That's because we haven't added it. We said we're only using the user pools through Cognito. So let's see if we can do this. We're going to do amplify update. And then we're going to update our API. We're going to update the GraphQL one. We're going to update auth settings. See, the default one's going to be Amazon Cognito user pool, but we want to configure additional types, which is API key. And we're just going to hit enter there. And we're going to say it expires 365 days. So this is just kind of a demo. And it should automatically add the CloudFormation scripts and everything through here. So that way people can access it both ways. Okay, so we're just go ahead and push it. This looks gives us a little bit of warning, but that should be fine. All right, so I went ahead and created the GraphQL endpoint. It even gives us the key and our endpoint right here. So now the next thing we need to do is create our Lambda. So we'll do amplify add function. And what this will do is it'll allow us to create a serverless function that we're going to use to query the YouTube API, which will then send through Cognito's authentication system to our Appsync GraphQL system. And it'll be able to do the insert inside there. So we'll go ahead and get that working. So we're gonna do a Lambda function. We'll just leave the, I'll call it team C's function. And we'll do Node.js, and we're gonna just use this hello world as a simple gateway. And it's asking us, do you want to configure advanced settings? So we're gonna say yes here. Do you want access to other resources? We'll say yes. So we want to make sure we can access both API and auth. And we'll just do create for the API. And for the auth, we'll do query and mutation. And then it'll say, by the way, here's a bunch of handy environmental variables that we'll be able to use, which is great because we might use that later on. And it's cool. Do you want to invoke the function on a recurring schedule? So the idea is this Lambda function, maybe every day or every 6 hours, it would contact the YouTube API to grab a list of videos that have the hashtag Team Cs. So that way we can generate this. These are all videos with hashtag Team Cs. And so, yeah, let's try that. So we'll do yes here. We'll do daily. We'll say, yeah, daily at, 2:40 p.m. I don't care. That's fine. Do you want to enable Lambda layers? No. Do you want to configure environmental layers? No. This is kind of interesting. Do you want to configure secret values? So yes, we have plenty of secret values that we'll need to enter in that we'll need so we can access our API and everything that we need. So I'm going to say yes here. Now it's asking to enter a secret name. So let me go ahead and add in a few. First, I want to do the Google access key. So I'm going to copy and paste this from a different screen. And the cool is it also hides the input. So I'm going to copy and paste this from a different screen too. And I'm going to go ahead and just add in all our secret values in here off camera, and then I'll be back. Okay, cool. So I went ahead and added in all my secret keys. I'll explain what those are later. We can basically use Amazon's secret manager to be able to get all the values, and it's really handy. So do you want to edit the local Lambda now? Sure, yes. And well, it'll go ahead and open a new window again, which once again, I already have a window open. So we don't really need to do that. So, but we can see this is where it is. It's in backend functions, C's function, source index.js. Cool, so now we have a new function, a Lambda function. I can bring it up here. So it's index.js. Here it is. It even tells you some of the secrets that I added in. This Google Access Key, client ID, password, username, user pool ID, and some of the environmental variables. Even tells you like how to get a hold of them. So at this point, I want to do a little bit more configuration because this Lambda right here is, if you look at it in this folder, it has basically the Amplify CLI created all this for us. It created this Amplify folder, created a backend folder, and then it also created this functions folder, and it created our Lambda function. And we created it as JavaScript, but honestly, I'd rather use TypeScript. So I'm going to convert this over to TypeScript real quickly, and it'll just take a couple of different steps. So first thing we need to do is we need to install the right TypeScript utilities and libraries to get it working. And then we're going to have it as a .ts file instead of a .js file. So let's go ahead and install what we need first. Okay, I need to go ahead and change it to Amplify, backend, and then function teamc's source. So this is where it is. Now there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do this. And I'm just gonna do it very simple. I'm gonna just set up TypeScript in the source folder. I know some other people like create their own folder structure and then have TypeScript generated inside the source folder. But we'll do it a little differently. So I'm gonna install some libraries here. First, I'm gonna install AWS Lambda, well, types. We're gonna add some types that we want. And some types for Node. And we need TypeScript. So this is the -D stands for developer dependencies. So let's go and install this first. Cool. And now let's go ahead and install some other dependencies to get this working. So we need AWS Appsync and the SDK for AWS. We're gonna use this isomorphic fetch, and we're gonna use UUID. We're gonna use GraphQL and GraphQL tag. And yeah, I think for now that's gonna be it. And of course I need to put I afterwards. Super. So went ahead and installed what we needed. And now we should be able to, we just need to do one more thing in this teamc's function. I'm gonna create a new file called tsconfig.json. And this is gonna hold our configuration for TypeScript. And I'm gonna copy and paste this because what essentially I'm doing right here is I'm gonna target for common.js, and it's gonna be module resolution node, and it's gonna be strict true, but I'm gonna allow any right here, no implicit any, so you can have any anywhere. I'm gonna use TypeScript on this, but I'm not gonna like fully use TypeScript everywhere and use types for everything, but I kind of like having TypeScript just in case I mess something up. So now I have tsconfig, and now another thing I want to do is I'm going to take a look at this source folder. I'm going to rename the JS file to TS. I'm going to have to do a few changes here to get it to work. So instead of having export handler, we're going to use at least a few types here. The most important one is it's not going to be export handler anymore. I'm going to export const handler, and that's going to equal an async function. And now I should be able to put a certain type of proxy handler. And what this is saying is that I want this type to be it, and I have to import it in. So I'm going to import this API gateway proxy handler from, and I think it's from the AWS Lambda. Cool. So I'm not getting any errors. Good. And by the way, you can just delete all this, but I'll leave it there for now. And then you can uncomment this if you want cores, but really this is just going to be a function that runs to do some things for us, like a cron tab every few hours. Now, to get this to work with Amplify, you go to the root package.json file, and you'll need to add in a new script that essentially says anytime you try to create or build, go ahead and run this on the script. So we're going to create something right here, and we're going to call it Amplify, and Amplify has to be the beginning of it with a colon, and then the name of our function that we want this to run during. So if we look at our Amplify backend function, it's called teamc's function. So teamc's function, and now we can put in right here what we want it to do. So this is actually directly from the documentation, but what this is saying, and I have to delete this part, it's teamc's function. What this is saying is anytime you build for Amplify, go to the Amplify backend function, teamc's function folder, run tsc, which is our TypeScript compiler, using tsconfig, and then change to that folder. So if we did this right, it should generate our file. And the way we can test it is we can use the mock functionality in the CLI. So if I clear this, now I know I have this source. If I go back to my Amplify, I have this index.ts. If this works, it should create an index.js file. So I'm going to do amplify mock function. And it's going to ask me in a second what it wants me to do. Just take a moment. Okay, it's asking me if I want to use this event.json to test it. It just basically sends an empty, basically an empty object over. So I'm going to say yes. Starting execution. Cool. So it looked like it worked. It created this JS file, which you can see here is just the same file, but it's now using, it's basically using this exports handler and using ES modules, and it should be working. And we can also test it too. We can push it up to see if it works on the server. So I'll do amplify push -y, and then we'll look at the Amplify console and see if we can test it out and see if our Lambda is working. Okay, let's take a look to see if our Lambda that we just created is showing up. So I'm going to run this Amplify console, and this will open up a new window into our console, which we can then look at everything we've done so far. So I'm going to choose Amplify console, and you can see from here, you can see here's our categories added, authentication, API function, tells us some of the resources that we've already done. So I'm going to click on functions. This is our Lambda, and we can even click view in Lambda, and this will show what we did so far. So first I can click test here. I can click test. Cool. So things are, I can even open the logs or just take a look at the default here, shows that it was working. We can even look at our configuration a little bit. Here are the keys that we went ahead and added. This Google Access key is going to be the key that we use to access Google. Now I have a few others added here: client ID, password, username, and user pool ID. So this is when I was doing the configuration. It asked me if I want some secrets, and it asked me what the names were and what the values were. So this client ID is, if you look in your AWS exports file, it's the same one that you have in there for your client ID there. The password, username and password is an account that I'm going to create. I haven't created yet, but I already created. The username is going to be an email address. Password is going to be a password I'm going to create. And then user pool ID is also from the AWS exports file. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you search for AWS exports, this is a file that's automatically created by, it's a file that's automatically created by Amplify when you added authentication, and it has all your kind of secrets. Now it's secret, so that's why I'm not going to show you. But inside there it has a user pool ID, and it has a couple different IDs. The user pool ID, you hear the other ID you put under client ID. Before we set up the Lambda, I just want to real quickly show you how the authenticator works and create a user that we're going to be able to use inside our Lambda. So to do that, I need to open up our app view file. And so real quickly, I'm going to import in authenticator from the AWS Amplify ui-vue. Remember, this is the @next. This is kind of our very new authenticator. It's still being worked on, and as of this recording, but it should be out very soon. And we should also be able to import AWS. Well, we'll import Amplify from AWS Amplify. And we also want to add in some styling for authenticator. So we're going to import in Amplify ui-vue styles.css. And then we also need to configure Amplify. Remember how I told you it created that AWS exports file, but now we can tell it to use that file. So we'll do Amplify configure, and I guess I have to import it in, huh? Exports from, now this is interesting. The file that it normally comes with is .js, but I went ahead and renamed it to .ts. That way I can import it in. So just go /AWS exports. There it is. And then you just pass that into configure. And now we should be able to use the authenticator. So I'm gonna get rid of this card for right now because I don't want it on here. And to use the authenticator, I'm just going to add in authenticator, the component. And I want to do a little configuration on here. And there's something called login mechanisms, and this is all inside the documentation for the authenticator. And I'm going to have it be an array, and the first one's going to be an email. And this basically tells it that it should have an email. It also exposes some slots, so I can do this, and I can expose sign out. And so anything between the opening and closing brackets of the authenticator will only show if you're logged in. So I'll put h3 hello from logged in, and then I'll put in a button here, which won't really look that great because I'm using Tailwind and I'm not styling anything, but I can put in sign me out. And then I'll have a click handler here that just goes to sign out. So this is the new authenticator, and essentially since we already created the backend, it should work. So I have my app still running in 4000. I'll refresh it here. Okay, cool. Here it is. We just had to stop and restart the server. And now let's create an account. So you have two tabs, sign in and create account. And you can configure this a lot, but this is what it looks like out of the box. So I'm going to create a new account. And I'm just going to put in some random passwords, an old email. And click create account. And it's going to ask me for my a confirmed sign up because I did it by email. So I'll look in my other table, my other browser here. I'll put it in. And I'll click confirm. Cool. It says I'm hello from logged in. I can sign me out. Now, if I go to the Amplify console, which I still have open, by the way, and I go to the overview, the categories added right here, I have authentication and API and functions. If I click on authentication, and now if we click on view in Cognito, it should have the Cognito that we just created. And this is where we set up our users to log in and out and all the configurations for it. So if I go to users and group, cool, it has my new user here. Now if I go to groups, I can create group. I'm going to create a new one called admins. And by the way, the user that we just created here has the same username and password we used in our secrets for our username and password. So those should match. And then I can actually go in here and I can add users. So now I can add this user to it. There we go. So now we have one user in the admins group. And now this user should be able to do some things like create and update and do some mutations in our Appsync. Also, to get this working correctly, I noticed we had to do one other quick setting. Clients, there's information here. If you click show details, there's this enable username password auth for admins for authentication. Go ahead and check mark that, save, and then do it for the other one as well. So I'm going to save both of these, and that is pretty much all the configuration we need to do inside Cognito. So let's get back to doing the Lambda. All right, actually, if you noticed the earlier video, I made a slight error. You would have seen I created this admins group. I actually need to create admin, because if we look at our schema file, you could see that I used this group's admin, so without an S. So I just need to make sure I add this admin group and then add my user, clicking the add user button to that group, then that should work. There's a few other things to do before we create our function, and I'll show you. I started a little bit off camera, but I'll show you exactly what I did here. First, we'll need to go to the package.json that's in our functions folder inside our functions here. And first thing I did is I actually added this types node. Otherwise, if you're using process, you might get some TypeScript errors in your VS Code editor. I also went ahead and you see this GraphQL. When I installed it originally, it gave me 16, but I went in and put it in 15 because there's a slight issue between GraphQL tag and GraphQL that was giving me a weird error anytime I was doing some operations through the AWS Appsync. So just make sure I used 15. You may not have this problem, but if you do, you may want to change this to 15. And like I said, go ahead and add in this at types node here. So after you do that, and make sure that if you're following along or coding along, that you have all these dependencies installed. If you've been jumping around, you may not. First thing I did is in my folder. And remember, the AWS Amplify creates this Amplify folder, but I have I have this backend folder, and then I have this function folder. And then inside this function folder, I have source, and I went ahead and created 3 new folders. I created an API folder, a GraphQL folder, and a YouTube folder. And so I wanted to separate out my logic between these 3. So the API folder does everything for contacting the API. So the Lambda will actually contact Cognito. It'll log in and get authenticated, and it'll use those credentials to be able to talk to our Appsync. And we'll see that working here in a second. So I think what I'll do is we'll start with the API. So first, you need to import stars AWS from AWS SDK. It actually recommends in the documentation that you do this import star. So that's the way I did it. And then I needed to add a new Cognito SP. So this is the Cognito Identity Service Provider. This is through the AWS SDK, and we're going to be using this to to connect to our authenticated Cognito user. So I'm going to first create this grab secrets. And so what this is doing is, this is essentially, if we remember, it gave us on the first page, which I'll show you this code in a second, but it gave us the, let's see, I think it's this one right at the top. This const parameters await new, this was actually generated as soon as we added the secrets manager, and it told us how to use it. So essentially that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the same sort of code that it gave us there. So what I'm need to do is I'm going to grab the username, the password, the client ID, the user poll ID, and the Google Access key. And this is all from our secrets manager. And then what this does is it maps the key to a process, basically an environmental variable. And then we're going to have to decrypt it with true. And so that's this whole function here. Now, for some reason, TypeScript was giving me an error, so I had to put the ts ignore. So what this will do is essentially it'll just return back basically an array of secrets, and there will be a name in this array that matches this process environmental variable. So to grab data, I created another kind of helper function called find secret that takes in a key name and parameters. And all this does is you pass in the key name, and then it does the dirty work of actually going through this array, this parameters array that's being returned, and it tries to look for the dot name. It's a capital N, and it matches that up to the key. So if you do process.env and then the key name, if that equals the name, then you have the right, basically have the right secret, and that should return the secret there. And it's a dot value is the secret. So the next one we're going to do is initiate auth params. And what this is going to do, first going to grab all the secrets, and then we're going to return an object. And this is going to be used with our initiate Cognito, or basically when we connect to Cognito, we need all these things. And so we're going to grab the client ID, the user poll ID, and we also need the username and the password. So this is using our 2 helper functions to use the secret manager to grab the data and then populate it into this object. Now the get credentials is where it's kind of the most complicated. What we have here is we're first initiating the auth params, so that way we have the data that we need, which I'll show you guys in a sec. And then that's initiate, that's right here. I guess I could close this to make it a little bigger. And we're returning I created our own promise around this, and that's where you use this Cognito SP. So admin initiate auth. And once I basically pass in all those parameters, and then I can get back the tokens for this user. And I can see if it gives me an error, then I can reject the promise. If it's null, I reject it. However, if it's not null and there's no errors, then I resolve the promise with the data. And like I said, this is just JWT tokens that you're going to use later. And that's it for the API for grabbing credentials. And we'll need to be using this with our AWS Appsync, so that way we can be authorized user to do mutations. Okay, so let's take a look at GraphQL and how we're gonna set this up. So the purpose of this is to use our managed Appsync GraphQL instance to be able to create videos, to list videos. So that's primarily what we want to do, and also be able to create a client. So first we're going to be using the AWS Appsync client that we installed earlier in the package.json. We're going to use this get credentials that I showed you earlier through the API, so that way we can actually be authenticated. And then we're going to use this GraphQL tag, which is kind of the way we're going to talk to our GraphQL database using the GraphQL language. So first thing I want to do is, using GQL, I'm going to create this list of videos and this create videos mutation. And you're probably wondering, well, how did I do this? Well, you can kind of do this yourself. I can show you guys a little bit later. You can log in to the AWS Console, go into the Appsync, and you can create your own queries. You can copy and paste them in here. But one nice thing about adding Amplify and adding Appsync, it actually creates for you, and you can look here on the right-hand side. Inside the source folder, it created this GraphQL, and it created the mutations and everything for us already. So what I did is I just went to the mutations, I copy and pasted the create video, and then I went to queries, and I copy and pasted the list video. And I just put them inside here. You can be more fancy and have one place that both the function and the front end pull from. But for now, just for sake of just being easy, I just went ahead and just copy and pasted manually. Obviously, if something changes, you need to change it in two places, which would be a little bit more of a pain. But just for now, this is good for this demo. And now let's go ahead and create the Appsync client. So this is going to be how it talks to the Appsync client to grab the credential to be able to actually talk to the endpoint. So we're going to create a new expiration date, and this one's probably the most complicated piece of code I had to write. I'm using the process API team sees Vue AWS process, which is the environmental variable that's automatically created when you add in this Appsync. And then we're going to create a new AWS Appsync client, and it's going to take a few things. It requires an object here. So we're going to disable offline true. We're going to pass in the URL. That's the GraphQL URL, the region. And then for auth, we want to make sure that we use the Amazon Cognito user pools. And then we're going to pass it those JWT tokens. And that's what was generated from our API. So we're going to check to see if the credentials are already expired by checking, kind of creating this new cred to check to see if it's null, and then how old it is based on today's date. And then if we need to, we can actually just run the get credentials again to get new ones. We also give ourselves like a 10-minute leeway, and then we basically check it this way. We create this new expires in from our credentials, and that's it. So this will create our client for us. Now all this code right here, let's see here, you don't really necessarily have to have all this code here. I just thought it was just a little bit nicer to have, and you certainly don't have to have it all. You could just return the credentials ID token specifically that you need, that you get from the auth. So let's take a look at the list data. So once we are able to have a client, we can then pass it into this list data. And once again, I didn't add too many types in here. Obviously, this would be the type of this AWS Appsync client. That's what I would expect. And you have to always do this hydrated. I'm not really sure. I haven't looked in the documentation, but I guess it just makes it so you can connect to the database. And then you surround it by a try-catch block. And then we're doing a query on it, and you pass in basically the data from that query. And this is where the graph query language comes into place, and that this is a part of JQL. And so we're going to essentially do a query for list videos. And that's pretty much it. We just pass in the list videos, this whole query here. We don't really need to pass anything else in. We're not adding any filters, and it should just do the query for us. Create videos is a little bit different. So first, we're going to assume that they pass in the input, which is going to be the video data that we want. And this would be like the YouTube data that has the ID, the video ID, publish at, channel ID, title, description, thumbnail, default, medium, high, title. And then we're going to basically use the client that we just created to do the mutation. And so once again, we return the transaction complete data. We're going to do this mutate. And you can see here, this client has query if you're doing queries, and then mutate if you're doing mutations. That's a way to do like updates. And then you just pass it the JQL. But we also need to pass in the input, all the data. So we set this variables, and then we just pass in the input that we expect. So that's the description, thumbnail, everything here, and then we'll just put new date is the date and time it was inserted. And that's it. So that's essentially it. And like I said, if you're trying to follow along, maybe take a look at the documentation, but this is essentially what we're doing as a utility function to create and update. You can see right here, this mutation here is the input. And so it expects all this stuff to be sent in with it. Okay, so let's take a look at how I did the YouTube. And this is essentially grabbing stuff dumped from the YouTube API and showing all our Team C's data. So in this file right here, I'm going to have a couple of things I need to grab. First, I'm going to need to grab the find secret and grab secrets. I need the Auth API. I'm going to use this UUID. This is going to be used to grab like a unique ID that I'll show you guys in a second, a UUID. And by the way, I did use the Stack Overflow. I sometimes paste inside my applications comments of places where I found things. That way, if I need it in the future, it's there. And here is the YouTube URL. Now you're probably thinking like, how did you know how to do this? There's really great documentation. I'm not going to show you, but if you just Google YouTube API, it'll explain how to create YouTube, how to basically connect to Google's API to grab YouTube information. There's ways of doing it through OAuth, but you can actually just do it through a key as well, and that's the way I'm doing it. So that's why we have this part equals snippet, Q equals Team C's, that's a hashtag, and max results. I think I'm putting like 22 in right now just to test it out, and then a key. And we could adjust that to like 20 or 30 if you want. So the first thing you need to do is like grab the YouTube URL, and you can notice this actually doesn't have the key value, it just says key equal. So obviously we need to add that in. That's not too bad. So what we need to do is first we're going to grab our secrets from that parameters. Remember we had that secrets file. We're going to find the Google access key secret using the find secret. And then we're just going to create a new string. So we just take the YouTube parcel and just slap the Google key at the end of it. Easy peasy, or very straightforward. I don't know, it's not super easy, but it is straightforward. Now I'm going to create a new function called grab YT data, and this is going to do the bulk of the work here, and it's going to use this URL and grab data. And so I'm going to grab the YouTube URL. It's going to return the total data, and I'm going to do this try catch block. And essentially what I'm going to do first, I'm going to do the fetch. And by the way, I'm using this isomorphic fetch because I'm using CommonJS. I'm passing the fetch function directly into the grab YT data. You probably didn't have to do that, but I thought it was just easy for this. And I was also getting some weird errors if I didn't pass it in, saying that it didn't recognize the version of fetch I was using. So I just did it this way. And this essentially is how you use fetch. You can, once you grab back the promise, you have to then grab the JSON data. Not doing a very good job of using types, but it at least helped me while I was writing this of not making some common mistakes. If I see an error, I'm just going to report the error out. And I made this while loop here, and this while loop is if I want to see, you basically can only grab 50 items at a time from the YouTube API, this API right here. So if I do over 50, I want to have a way for it to keep looping through and grabbing more data. And I'm also finding the YouTube API is it's not great. to grab data, like this sorting doesn't work right. But you can, it just gives you the most relevant data, so the ones that are most relevant to you when it does its search. So what I want to do, there's actually a token that it returns back that you can use as like a placeholder to get the next page. So what I do is I grab the data from the URL and I essentially use this page token, if there is a page token, and I loop through it and I add it to this total data. And so what this is doing, before we get to format videos, is just looping through this, incrementing the times through, and every time it can go through, it just goes to the next page token if it's there. So that way we can grab all the data that we need. And if it only goes through once, that's fine too. So let's take a look at the next function, is this format videos. So after we get all the data, so we're grabbing all the data, if it did the loop, we grabbed it all, I kind of want to map it into this specific format. That way it's much easier to use in my file that I'll show you next to actually pass it into the Appsync's GraphQL mutation. So I want to make sure I have this, I basically want to make sure I have it in this format. I have this ID, this video ID, publish that, channel ID, title description, thumbnail default, thumbnail medium, high, and title. And I actually don't need this URL. So essentially, this is just a nice format function that will return it the exact way I want it, because this is a big, giant object that gets returned every time you grab the data, and I only want these items from it. Okay, so now since we have all our helper functions done to grab the API, the GraphQL, and YouTube, so now we can focus on the main page here, which will allow us to do everything we need to do. So this is kind of the entry point of our app. This is when you I set up TypeScript in here, so I should be able to import everything in and works. And this is kind of how it looks before we change anything. We're just sending the test hello, but we want it to do a few things. So let's take a look. So first, I want to grab this isomorphic fetch. That's what I installed through the package.json. My API gateway handler, that's just a type that for this handler that you can set to give us the right type, right return value for the handler, that is. We're going to grab our get credentials from our API. We're going to get a bunch of stuff from our GraphQL. We want to be able to list the data. We want to be able to get the Appsync client, and we want to be able to create videos. And then we also want to be able to grab our formatted list of videos from our YouTube API. So first thing we need to do, we need to create a client, because remember we have to pass that client to all these like helper functions we created. So we create the client, and then we want to actually get the videos. So this format videos will get us the list of videos and also format them in the perfect way. Also, we're kind of not putting this in a try-catch block. If we wanted to, we could do that. That way, if any of these APIs failed, we would get some sort of error and I can return it back in the body. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. We're also going to do a query. So we want to we want to see what sort of data is already inside the GraphQL database. Then I always do console logs. I just want to make sure that, hey, I actually got data back. And then this is where the logic will come together. So I'm just doing a loop because we know this videos is formatted in an array of objects. We're going to look through it. We're going to take this query and we're going to see if the video was already in the query, because we don't want to insert a video that's already there. So we're going to check the video ID if it's already matches any of the videos that we already have from that we got from the API, the YouTube API. So if it doesn't, basically if it exists, then we just skip. So so this double bang right here just takes this string, and if it's null, then it won't. It will skip this. If it's true, then it will run this exists. And so we don't want to accidentally create duplicate videos. So then if that's fine, we then send, and I only called it T, but basically you call it create video, whatever you want. And it sends the video to the create videos, which is in our GraphQL, which will automatically create the mutation. And then we can then console log it out to see if everything worked fine. And that's it. That's essentially everything we're doing here in this Lambda function. It's a lot. It's a little bit complicated. If I had to do it again, the one thing I would do is I would, instead of using the Cognito API with the identity pools, you can actually use IAM sort of authentication instead to your GraphQL. That might have made things a little bit easier, but I think this works fine. So now we should be able to go ahead and test this. All right, so let's see if we can test our function. Now, since we're using a function and we have our GraphQL backend, we can actually mock both of them. So to do that in the console, we just type mock amplify mock and then API. And what this will do is it'll spin up a mock API with kind of a GraphQL explorer that we can test out. So this will just take a moment. Cool. So it created this mock endpoint right here. So if I click on it, it'll go ahead and just open inside my window here. Here it is. And it's just like a GraphQL explorer that you've seen in the past. So let's say I want to do a query. I guess we can type in a query here, and I'll do list videos and items. And now I can do the ID, video ID. And if I play there, you can see I have nothing in there. And by the way, just for this, I'm going to use API key, because if you remember, I set it up so you can list items for free. Basically, you can list items with the API key. You don't need to be authenticated. And so if I hit play again, you can see I don't have anything. So, but if I want to test out everything, I can actually create a new window here, or I'll look at my other one, and I'll just type in amplify mock function. And then I need to put a timeout because it does take longer than 10 seconds sometimes. So this will make sure that it doesn't time out. And if I hit enter here, it'll ask me a question about what event I want to use to run against the mock function, and then it'll run. And if it works correctly, it'll hit this API. And this actually is a mocked API. It's using a fake DynamoDB database that's on the local host on the computer. So we're not actually touching the endpoint on the actual AWS server. So I've hit yes here. It's just going to, and by the way, this is just an event JSON file that just sends over some dummy data. So it's ensuring the latest functions changes are built. Remember, we had in our package JSON on the root this amplify teamc's function. So it's essentially creating all the TypeScript files. It's going to create all those .js files. It's going to convert the TypeScript to JavaScript. And if everything works correctly, it should try to run it. And one thing to realize when you're running mock functions, some functions will work correctly and you can access the servers. Some won't work correctly. So I would not rely on the mock functionality for everything. I would occasionally push it up to the actual AWS system and then test it through there. But you can see it looks like it finished on me. It grabbed a bunch of data. It says, gave my result of hello. And now if I try to do this again, cool. Now I can see I got 2 videos that it actually pulled. So if I want to grab the titles of those videos, I know this is kind of small, but you can see right here, I cleaned the world's dirtiest beach. So awesome. So we definitely know it's working. Now, if you want to test out the mutation, remember, if we looked at our, let's see here. If we looked at our schema JSON, well, actually, it's in our schema GraphQL. This one, we said you can only do the mutation part, like actual creating and deleting, if you're in the admin group and you have to be authenticated with the Cognito user pool. So it does have a way you can kind of mock out the Cognito user pool and add additional fields. I have not been able to get this working just using the mock data here, because it really is just kind of faking the information there. So I have not been able to test this or to get it working. So really, if I wanted to delete the data in here and like keep testing and tracking, if you're following along, there's inside the server, there is a function file, an actual mock data, DynamoDB, this fake US fake one. This is, you can use SQLite and actually open this file up and delete the data that way. So that's the way I recommend it just for this test right here. If you're listening and watching right now and you figure out a way to get this working, because I try to change this to groups and then try this group and try it and get it working, let me know in the comments. That'd be awesome. So in the meantime though, if we go back to our app here, I'm going to stop this GraphQL operation. By the way, I would highly recommend when you're testing to start the API first and then start up the Lambda, because I've had problems where first it wasn't finding the server, so it just sat there for 5 minutes until it timed out. So make sure that you start it. And there's also configurations you can do to tell it not to use this and actually go directly to your AWS system when you're testing your Lambda functions. There's like a .env file. I won't get into that, but it is possible. It's in the documentation. All right, so since I think I have everything working, I'm going to run Amplify status, and this will just tell me the changes I made and if I need to update them or push them, and I haven't. You can see right here, the function I created, I still need to push it. So that should be pretty easy. It also gives me my fake data here. So I'm gonna amplify push. I'm gonna put TAC-Y, because otherwise it asks me, are you sure? I'm sure. So this will go ahead and push it, and we'll just give it a moment. Okay, so it updated the cloud, so we should be able to now test in the cloud. Remember, you need to type in Amplify console, and it'll ask you if you want admin UI or if you want the normal console. I always choose the normal console. Admin UI is something different. Maybe if you guys are really interested, leave a comment below and I'll show all the cool stuff you can do with admin UI. Let's choose Amplify console. It'll open up for you. And remember, right here, you have the categories. You can just kind of jump around and just go and take a look at each one. So let's say I want to do, well, we just pushed up everything. Let's look at the functions. Click functions. So now you can do Vue in Lambda. And now this Vue in Lambda here will show the Lambda function. And we can look at the configuration. Here's all our values. Well, here is the values, the endpoints, everything that we did here. And remember here, these are the ones that are in the secret manager. These values are basically through the process.env, and then the secret manager gives you the real values of all these. We also have asynchronous invocation. Remember how we did it? So now it runs every 6 hours and it retries twice. If we go to test, we can actually test to see if it worked. But first, remember how I showed you how the API, the mock API work? Well, you can look inside Appsync and click on that link there, and Appsync will have a very similar interface. So if you go to queries, so here it is. I can even log in. This actually works well, so I can log in with user pools. In this case, I'm just going to pick this one. Well, you know, in fact, maybe instead of logging in with user pool, I'll log in with the API key. And I already added in this query here at the bottom. If I hit play, okay, so there's already 2 items in here. So maybe as soon as I uploaded the Lambda, it may have already ran. Let's take a look here. Or it could have been when I was playing around with it earlier, I already sent 2 up. But let's test this up. Let's test this and see if it works. This is the Lambda. I'm invocating it to actually run. So it said it worked. And I can click on logs here, and this will open the logs for it through CloudWatch, which I can then, by the way, if you're creating Lambdas, you'll be doing this all the time, looking at the logs, doing console logs. And you can say, cool, here's the query. I see the data. I see all the information. So it looks like it worked. And if I come back over here to my AppSync and hit play here, okay, so it added 2 more. So now I have 4 in here. And you can see they're all unique. They're not being duplicated. I can do title. Cool, now I can see all the different titles. So I have 4 videos in my player here, and hypothetically, what this would do, since I have the configuration to run every 6 hours, it would grab more videos, it would check to see if there's any duplicates, and keep adding to this list. So every 6 hours, I'd have more and more to the list. I think at this point, what we should do, since we know the Lambda is working, we're not getting any errors. At this point, it's probably, let's go back to the front end to see if we can retrieve the information and display it to the user. And yeah, let's see if that works. All right, so we left off our app view file with just this authenticator, and then we had this dummy card. So I'll show you how we can access the API so we can start listening data and connect to our Appsync from the front end. So first, I want to make sure I have a few new operations and a few new imports in. I have this Amplify we had before, but now I'm adding an API. This is how I'm going to access GraphQL and have this GraphQL operation. And I want to use a ref from Vue, so I'm a reactive variable. I'm going to use this list video. So remember that GraphQL already automatically created this GraphQL. And I went ahead and renamed queries to queries.ts so it can be imported in, by the way. If you ever have a problem with that, I think you can go into your TS config and make it so you can import in JSON file or JavaScript files, but for now I just went ahead and changed it. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new function called myListVideos, and then I'm gonna run it. So, and then I'm gonna store everything in this videos, basically this reactive videos variable. And first I wanna do is, well, the last couple things we're going to do is set this videos file. But here's the GraphQL. So I'm going to await it. It's going to use api.graphql. I'm going to pass in a query called list videos. I'm going to do the auth mode API key because, as we've talked about before, we can list videos through the API key. We can't do any mutations or changes to it. And I'm going to send a variable through it and just limit it to 20. And now I'm going to work on the template. I'm using this flex wrap here. So with Tailwind CSS, I'm going to do a v4. I'm going to take this video. So remember, see right here. Once again, I didn't use many types here, but I'm grabbing this big nested video items. That should be a list of the items. I'm going to iterate them over. And I'm going to create my card. I'm going to pass in the title, description, thumbnail, date time, channel title, video ID, and channel ID. Cool. So if we did this correctly, it should work. So I'm going to open up the website again. I went ahead and closed it. And it'll load it all up. So it should be accessing the GraphQL API. Cool. There it is. So I have all the different cards. I only have 4 in the database you saw. And here they all are. And by the way, if I ever needed to, I can actually go, if I didn't want to try to create a mutation through here, I can go directly to the DynamoDB database and just delete the records as a quick way of testing. So that's it. So there's a lot more things I think you could do with this. I know I commented out this login system, but wouldn't it be cool if logged in, you could have users log in and then add in their own videos that they wanted, or maybe you could add in a button to click here and it just randomly opens up a one of these videos. And then of course you could check to make sure the links work here. So that there's a lot of really cool things. Now this was quite complicated, but I think this is a neat way of doing this, because now we've learned a little bit about the managed GraphQL system through Appsync. We're able to connect to their APIs. We're able to create a Lambda function and use Cognito. And if you ever need to, you can just also kind of explore the AWS services and see how it all works too throughout it. So let me know if that's helpful. Let me know if you learned anything. Leave a comment below. Also, if you guys are interested in getting taught some of these things, I also occasionally help mentor people, but the links all in the description below. Thanks.